when a struggling young woman agreed to marry a 74-year-old millionaire to save her family. She thought she was sacrificing her dreams for their survival. But 1 week later, she stumbled upon a locked room in his mansion, and what she found inside would forever change the course of her life. What began as an act of desperation soon unraveled into a story of secrets, redemption, and a love she never expected to find. The sun dipped low over the rolling hills of Willow Creek, painting the small town in hues of gold and crimson. Lily Harper stood on the front porch of her family's worn-down house, the faint hum of crickets blending with the distant rumble of cars on the highway. Her calloused hands rested on the porch railing, her eyes scanning the mailbox that never seemed to bring good news. Behind her, the sound of her father's wheezing cough broke the stillness, a harsh reminder of the weight she carried on her slender shoulders. Lily was 21 but felt twice her age. Between her shifts at the diner and caring for her younger sister, Emma, and their ailing father, she had little time to think about her own dreams. College was a distant fantasy, buried beneath a mountain of unpaid bills and medical expenses. The once cheerful family home was falling apart, much like the hope Lily tried desperately to cling to that evening. As the last rays of sunlight filtered through the cracked windows, a sound broke the quiet, a low hum that grew louder until it stopped just outside their driveway. Lily's heart skipped as she peered out the window. A sleek black car, polished to a mirror shine, idled in stark contrast to the rusted pickup trucks that dotted the neighborhood. The car door opened, and out stepped Edward Montgomery, a man whose presence commanded attention. His tailored suit and silver hair gleamed under the fading light, his every step exuding authority. For a moment, Lily could only watch as he approached the porch, his gaze steady and unreadable. "Miss Harper," he said, his voice deep and deliberate. "I've come to discuss an opportunity." Lily stepped outside, the wooden porch creaking beneath her weight. "An opportunity?" she echoed, her brow furrowing. "Who are you?" Edward offered a small, calculated smile. "My name is Edward Montgomery. I own several properties and investments in this region." He paused, glancing at the peeling paint of the house before meeting her eyes again. "I understand your family has been facing some challenges." Lily's jaw tightened. "That's not exactly your business." "Perhaps not," Edward replied smoothly, "but I'm here to offer a solution." He reached into his coat pocket, retrieving a crisp envelope. "If you agree to marry me, I will ensure your father receives the best medical care available. Your sister's education will be fully funded, and your family's financial troubles will become a thing of the past." The words hung in the air like a thundercloud. Lily's hands clenched as she stared at the envelope. "Marry you?" she said, disbelief lacing her voice. Edward's expression remained composed. "This isn't an ordinary arrangement, Miss Harper. I'm offering security, stability, and the chance to rebuild your family's future. All I ask is your companionship and your trust." Before Lily could respond, her father's voice called weakly from inside the house. She turned toward the sound, her heart twisting. When she looked back at Edward, his gaze hadn't wavered. "I won't pressure you," Edward said finally, stepping back toward his car. "But I will need your answer soon. Time is a luxury neither of us can afford." As the black car disappeared down the dusty road, Lily stood frozen on the porch, the weight of his words pressing down on her. Felt like a deal with the devil. But could she afford to say no? That night, as Lily sat at the kitchen table with the dim light casting shadows across her face, the dilemma consumed her. Was this a lifeline or a trap? And if she said yes, what price would she truly pay? The night after Edward's visit, Lily sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the crumpled bills that threatened to drown her family. Her father's faint coughing echoed from the next room, a harsh reminder of the stakes. Across from her, her younger sister Emma dozed off, her head resting on a pile of open textbooks. The dim light of the single bulb above cast long shadows, matching the weight on Lily's heart. Could she really do this? Could she marry a man more than 3 times her age? Someone she barely knew? To save them all? The question gnawed at her soul. The following morning, Lily stood at the edge of the fields near their home, the cool breeze brushing against her face as she replayed Edward's words. He had promised everything: financial security, medical care for her father, and a future for Emma. It all sounded like a dream, yet the thought of giving up her freedom and her chance at real love felt like a nightmare. She whispered into the empty air, "Is this the only way?" Her father, perceptive despite his frailty, pulled her aside later that day. "Lily, you've carried this family on your back for too long," he said, his voice hoarse but steady. "You deserve a chance to live your life, not sacrifice it for us." His words were meant to reassure her, but they only deepened her conflict. How could she stand by and watch them suffer when a solution was within reach? That night, Lily poured her heart out to Emma, who listened intently, her young face marked by a maturity born of hardship. "You always tell me to follow my dreams," Emma said softly. "Maybe it's time you do the same. We'll find another way." "Lily, we always do." But as much as Lily wanted to believe in those words, the reality felt impossible. Their debts wouldn't wait, and time was running out. Before I continue with this emotional journey, I want to connect with you, my amazing viewers. Have you ever faced a decision so difficult it felt like there was no right answer? Drop a glowing star in the comments if you've ever had to make a choice that changed your life. And don't forget to like this video if you believe in the strength of family, because this story is one you won't want to miss. The days blurred together as Lily wrestled with her decision. Gossip began to swirl through the small town as neighbors caught sight of Edward's sleek black car and Lily's distant expressions. Whispers about that young waitress and the old rich man reached her ears, but she kept her head down, focusing on her family and the promise she had made to protect them. Finally, with a trembling hand, she called Edward. "I'll do it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She couldn't see his face on the other end of the line, but she could feel the shift in his tone. "You've made a wise choice, Lily," he said simply. "I'll handle the arrangements." As the call ended, Lily sank onto the edge of her bed, tears streaming down her face. For the first time in her life, she didn't know whether she was saving her family or losing herself. With each breath, the weight of her choice grew heavier. In the quiet of her room, she whispered, "Please let this be worth it." The morning of the wedding dawned clear and cold, the crisp air biting at Lily's skin as she stepped into her borrowed wedding dress. The lace scratched against her arms, and the veil felt like a cage. In the mirror, her reflection stared back at her. Wide-eyed and full of fear, Emma appeared at her side, clutching Lily's hand tightly. "You're the strongest person I know," Emma said, her voice breaking. "Don't forget that." As Lily walked down the aisle, her mind raced with doubts and hopes, fears and dreams. She wasn't walking toward a man she loved, but toward a chance to save the people who mattered most. She held onto that thought like a lifeline. The ceremony was a blur of polite smiles and distant gazes. Edward, ever composed, placed a simple gold ring on her finger, sealing their pact. For Lily, it felt less like a promise and more like a binding contract. As they exchanged vows, her heart whispered a quiet plea. "Please, don't let this be the end of my story. Let it be the start of something better." Little did she know, the journey she had just begun would lead her to truths she never imagined, and to a future she couldn't have foreseen. Stay tuned, because what happens next will shock you and move you to tears. Lily's arrival at Edward's sprawling estate felt like stepping into another world. The mansion stood on a secluded hill, its towering silhouette framed by the glow of the setting sun. The grand iron gates creaked open as her car approached, revealing meticulously landscaped gardens and a stone pathway leading to the entrance. It was breathtaking in its grandeur yet strangely foreboding, as if the walls held secrets they weren't ready to share. As the car came to a halt, Lily stepped out, clutching her small suitcase tightly. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and blooming roses, But the silence was unnerving. The mansion's heavy oak doors opened, and a woman in her late 60s, dressed in a crisp uniform, greeted her with a polite but distant smile. "Welcome, Mrs. Montgomery," the woman said, her voice warm but cautious. "I'm Margaret, the housekeeper. If you need anything, please don't hesitate to ask." Lily forced a smile. "Thank you, Margaret, and please, call me Lily." Margaret hesitated, her eyes softening briefly, before nodding. "Very well, Lily. Let me show you to your room." The mansion's interior was as grand as the exterior, with marble floors, sweeping staircases, and chandeliers that sparkled like starlight. Yet, despite its beauty, the space felt cold, almost lifeless. Every step Lily took echoed, the sound bouncing off the high ceilings as if reminding her of the emptiness that surrounded her. Her room, tucked away on the east wing, was modest compared to the rest of the house. The bed was draped in fine linens, and a small balcony overlooked the gardens. But it lacked the warmth of a home. Margaret lingered for a moment as Lily unpacked, her gaze flicking to the door before she spoke. "If I may, Mrs. Montgomery," she began, then stopped, as if reconsidering her words. "What is it?" Lily asked, turning to her. Margaret hesitated, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "This house has rules. Some doors are locked for a reason. It's best not to question them." The cryptic warning left Lily unsettled. "What's behind them?" she pressed. Margaret shook her head. "It's not my place to say. Just be careful." With that, she excused herself, leaving Lily alone in the growing dusk. The quiet of the room pressed in on her, and for the first time, she felt the weight of her decision fully settle on her chest. The days that followed were filled with a strange monotony. Edward was often away, spending hours in his study or leaving the estate altogether for business meetings. Their interactions were cordial but distant, like two strangers bound by an unspoken contract. At meals, the long dining table felt absurdly empty, the clinking of silverware on porcelain the only sound between them. "Do you always eat alone?" Lily asked one evening, her voice breaking the silence. Edward looked up from his plate, his expression unreadable. "Mostly," he replied. "I've grown accustomed to it." Lily studied him, searching for a trace of vulnerability beneath his stoic exterior. "Why did you marry me, Edward?" His fork paused midair, but his gaze didn't waver. "You know why," he said simply. "This arrangement benefits us both." The conversation ended there, leaving Lily with more questions than answers. It wasn't long before the mansion's eerie quiet began to gnaw at her. At night, strange noises echoed through the halls, faint creaks, soft footsteps, and the occasional low hum that seemed to come from nowhere. She tried to dismiss them, telling herself it was an old house settling into the night. But the unease lingered. One evening, unable to sleep, Lily decided to explore. The vastness of the mansion was overwhelming, with its endless hallways and towering doors. Most rooms were locked, just as Margaret had warned. But one door in the west wing caught her attention. Its handle was brass, worn smooth with age, and unlike the others, it had no visible lock. As she reached for the handle, her pulse quickened. The faint sound, like whispering, seemed to emanate from within. She hesitated, her hand trembling, when a voice behind her made her jump. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Lily spun around to see Margaret standing in the dimly lit hallway, her expression grave. "Why not?" Lily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Margaret stepped closer, her eyes darting to the door and back to Lily. "Some things are better left alone. Trust me." The warning only fueled Lily's curiosity, but she nodded, stepping back reluctantly. That night, as she lay in bed, her mind raced with questions. What was Edward hiding? And why did the mansion feel like it was holding its breath, waiting for her to uncover something it didn't want her to see? The following morning, Edward's absence was palpable. Lily took the opportunity to ask Margaret about his routine, but the housekeeper remained tight-lipped. "Mr. Montgomery is a private man," she said, her tone final. Lily decided she couldn't wait for answers to come to her. She needed to find them herself. As the days passed, her exploration of the mansion grew bolder. Each locked door felt like a puzzle, and each shadowy corner seemed to whisper a secret. But it was the West Wing door, with its silent defiance, that kept drawing her back. When she finally opened it, what she found would change everything and reveal the truth about the man she had married. Lily's hand trembled as she pushed the door open, its hinges groaning in protest. The room beyond was dimly lit, the air heavy with the scent of aged wood and something faintly metallic. A single chandelier, its crystals coated in dust, cast muted light over a sprawling study filled with dark mahogany furniture and towering shelves crammed with books. The room felt untouched, as though frozen in time. Stepping inside, Lily's eyes were drawn to a large desk at the center of the room. On its surface sat an ornate leather-bound journal, its corners worn and gilded edges dulled. Around it were neatly arranged papers, photographs, and what appeared to be legal documents. She hesitated before picking up one of the photographs, her breath catching as she studied it. The image showed Edward, younger but unmistakable, standing beside a woman with a radiant smile. The back of the photograph bore the words Edward and Elise, 1982 in elegant handwriting. Setting it aside, Lily found another, and then another, each one featuring Edward with a different woman, their smiles frozen in moments of happiness. But the years written on the back spanned decades, far too many for any ordinary relationship history. Her pulse quickened as she examined the documents beneath the photos, marriage certificates, prenuptial agreements, and her stomach dropped, death certificates. Each document told a story that ended in tragedy. Accidents, sudden illnesses, disappearances. A chill ran down Lily's spine. Was this a coincidence? Or was there something darker at play? As she reached for the journal, her hand paused, hovering over its cover. The room felt colder, the air pressing in around her. Finally, she opened it, revealing pages of Edward's neat, deliberate handwriting. The entries started innocuously enough: reflections on business ventures, travel, and occasional musings about life. But as she flipped further, the tone shifted. One entry read, "Elise was the first to leave. She thought she could escape, but she didn't understand. They never do. They belong to me, even in the end." Lily's heart pounded as she skimmed through more entries, each darker than the last. Edward wrote of his distrust in people, his disdain for their fleeting loyalty, and his belief that control was the only way to keep order in his life. The women in the photographs weren't just wives. They were captives in his carefully constructed world. A loud creak from the hallway snapped Lily out of her trance. Her head whipped toward the door, her breath hitching as she listened. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate. She hurriedly closed the journal, sliding it into her bag before stepping back into the shadows of the room. The footsteps grew louder until they stopped just outside the door. "Lily," Edward's voice called, calm yet unnervingly firm. "Are you in there?" She held her breath, her heart hammering in her chest. The door creaked open, and Edward stepped inside. His gaze swept the room before landing on her. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the air thick with tension. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his tone deceptively soft. I couldn't sleep," Lily stammered, her mind racing for an excuse. "I wanted to explore the house." Edward's eyes darkened, a shadow of anger flickering across his face. "This room is off limits," he said, his voice like ice. "I thought I made that clear." Lily swallowed hard, nodding. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to intrude." For a long moment, Edward said nothing, his gaze piercing as though he were searching for something in her expression. Finally, he stepped aside, gesturing to the door. "Go back to your room, and stay out of places you don't belong." Lily didn't need to be told twice. She hurried past him, clutching her bag tightly as she left the study. Back in her room, she locked the door and sank onto the bed, her hands trembling as she pulled the journal from her bag. As the hours stretched into dawn, she pored over its contents, piecing together the story of Edward's life. He wasn't just a man burdened by loss, he was a man consumed by it, using wealth and power to control the people around him. Each marriage was meticulously planned, each ending shrouded in mystery. Among the entries, one phrase stood out, written in bold letters that sent a chill down her spine. They think they can leave. They don't realize they're mine until it's too late. By the time the first rays of sunlight filtered through her curtains, Lily knew she couldn't stay. She had to find a way out of the mansion, and she had to expose the truth. But escaping Edward's grasp wouldn't be easy. His wealth and influence reached far beyond the estate, and his watchful eye missed nothing. Lily glanced out the window, her gaze falling on the high walls surrounding the property. The world outside seemed so close yet impossibly far. She clenched her fists, her resolve hardening. Whatever it took, she would find a way to break free, and she would ensure that Edward's secrets could no longer trap anyone else. The days following her discovery felt like an eternity. Lily moved through the mansion with a forced smile and careful steps, her every action weighed down by the knowledge she now carried. Edward's demeanor hadn't changed. He was as composed and calculated as ever, but Lily couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching her more closely, as though sensing her unease. Each meal became a quiet battle of wills. At breakfast, Edward's polite inquiries felt like veiled interrogations. "Did you sleep well?" he asked one morning, his gaze lingering on her for just a moment too long. "Yes," Lily replied, forcing a calmness she didn't feel. "The house is so peaceful." The lie tasted bitter, but she had no choice. To arouse suspicion now would be dangerous. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the mansion fell into its usual eerie silence, Lily made her decision. She couldn't continue this charade any longer. The journal's pages haunted her, each word a reminder that she was living in the grip of a man who saw people as possessions. Summoning her courage, she made her way to Edward's study, the journal clutched tightly in her hands. This time, there would be no sneaking, no hiding. She needed answers, and she needed them now. Edward looked up as she entered, his expression shifting from mild curiosity to wary calculation. He was seated behind his desk, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, the firelight casting sharp shadows across his face. "Lily," he said, setting the glass down. "To what do I owe this visit?" She stepped forward, placing the journal on the desk between them. "I found this," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her chest. "I read it." For a moment, Edward didn't move. His eyes dropped to the journal, then back to her, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. "And what do you think you've found?" he asked finally, his tone calm but edged with something darker. "The truth," Lily replied, meeting his gaze. "About your past, about the women who came before me, about how none of them escaped." Edward leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him. "You've been busy," he said, his voice betraying no emotion. "Tell me, what conclusions have you drawn from your investigation?" Lily's hands clenched at her sides. "You control people," she said. "You manipulate them, isolate them, and when they try to leave, you make sure they can't. Is that what you plan to do to me?" For the first time, Edward's composure cracked. His jaw tightened, and a flicker of anger flashed in his eyes. "You don't understand," he said, his voice low and sharp. "Everything I've done to protect what's mine." "Protect?" Lily shot back, her voice rising. "You don't protect people, Edward. You trap them. You use them to fill whatever emptiness you're trying to hide. And when they stop serving your purpose, you—" "Enough," Edward interrupted, his tone cutting through her words like a blade. He rose from his chair, his towering presence casting a shadow over her. You think you know me, Lily? You think you understand what it means to lose everything, to have the people you trust betray you? His voice cracked on the last word, and for a fleeting moment, Lily saw something beneath the surface: pain, regret, vulnerability. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the cold mask he always wore. You have no idea what it's like to be me, he continued, his voice steady once more. This world doesn't reward kindness. It rewards power, control. I learned that the hard way. Lily's anger faltered, replaced by a wave of conflicted emotion. She wanted to hate him, to see him as nothing more than the monster the journal painted him to be. But now, standing before her, he looked less like a villain and more like a man consumed by his own demons. Then why me? She asked softly. Why marry me? Was it just another game to you? Edward hesitated, the question seeming to catch him off guard. He turned away, staring into the fire. Because you're different, he said after a long pause. You remind me of someone I lost a long time ago, someone I thought I could save. The confession hung in the air, heavy and raw. Lily didn't know whether to believe him, but the vulnerability in his voice was undeniable. That doesn't justify what you've done, she said, her voice trembling. You can't keep running from your pain by hurting others. You need to face it. You need to let go. Edward turned back to her, his expression unreadable once again. And what would you have me do, Lily? He asked. Open my doors? Share my secrets with the world? Trust that people won't destroy me the moment they see my weakness? Yes, Lily said simply, because if you don't, you'll destroy yourself. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled softly, its light dancing across the room. Finally, Edward sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. You're braver than I gave you credit for, he said. But bravery doesn't guarantee survival. No, Lily replied, stepping closer. But it guarantees freedom. And I'd rather be free than live as a prisoner in this house. Edward studied her, his gaze softening just enough to reveal a sliver of the man beneath the mask. You've given me a lot to think about, he said quietly. But be careful, Lily. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. She left the study with her heart pounding, unsure of what her confrontation had accomplished. But for the first time since stepping into the mansion, she felt a spark of hope. Perhaps Edward wasn't beyond redemption. Perhaps, just perhaps, she could find her way out of the shadows, whether he joined her or not. This story is far from over. Before I share the next chapter, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever faced someone who hid their true self behind walls of pain or fear? Share your story in the comments. And don't forget to like this video if you believe in the power of confronting the truth. The next part of Lily's journey will leave you breathless. The days following Lily's confrontation with Edward marked a turning point in their lives. The mansion, once shrouded in cold silence, began to stir with a faint but unmistakable warmth. Edward's demeanor softened, his guarded expressions giving way to something that almost resembled vulnerability. He spent more time outside his study, lingering at meals and even joining Lily for quiet walks in the garden. Though their conversations remained guarded, the unspoken tension between them began to ease. One crisp morning, Lily was tending to the flowers near the fountain when Edward approached, his hands tucked into the pockets of his tailored coat. For a moment, he simply watched her, his gaze distant yet thoughtful. You're good with those, he said finally, gesturing to the blooming roses. They're easier to understand than people. Lily replied with a small smile, brushing dirt from her hands. Flowers just need care and patience. They don't ask for much. Edward nodded, his expression pensive. If only life were that simple. A quiet pause settled between them before Lily spoke again. It could be, if you let it. Her words seemed to linger in the air, and for the first time, Edward didn't deflect. Instead, he gave a small nod and walked away, leaving Lily with the sense that a wall had finally begun to crack. Over the following weeks, Edward's actions spoke louder than his words. He began making changes around the mansion, unlocking previously sealed rooms, inviting local charities to host events on the estate, and even opening up his financial records to ensure his past dealings were above board. Margaret, the housekeeper, watched the transformation with a cautious but hopeful smile. One evening, Edward knocked on Lily's door, something he had never done before. When she opened it, he held out an envelope. "I've arranged for your father's treatments to continue at a private facility," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "And Emma's tuition has been paid in full." Lily stared at him, her heart swelling with gratitude and disbelief. "Why are you doing this?" Edward hesitated before answering. "Because you were right. It's time I stopped trying to control the world and started making amends." Tears welled in Lily's eyes, but she blinked them away, offering him a soft smile. "Thank you," she said. "This means more to me than you'll ever know." The mansion gradually transformed into a place of life and purpose. Lily suggested turning the unused East Wing into a community center, and to her surprise, Edward agreed. They worked together to renovate the space, filling it with books, art supplies, and even a small kitchen for cooking classes. It became a haven for local families, a place where laughter and hope replaced the mansion's old ghosts. As the weeks turned into months, Lily and Edward's relationship deepened. What had started as a transactional agreement evolved into a genuine partnership. Edward began sharing stories from his past, of his childhood, his mistakes, and the regrets that had driven him to build walls around his heart. Lily, in turn, shared her dreams, her fears, and the moments of quiet joy she found in her new life. One evening, as they sat together in the garden under a sky filled with stars, Edward turned to Lily, his expression uncharacteristically open. "You've changed everything," he said. "For the first time in years, I feel free." Lily smiled, her heart full. "You've changed too, Edward. You just needed someone to remind you that it's never too late." Their journey wasn't without challenges. The whispers from the town persisted, and there were moments when the weight of their shared history threatened to pull them apart. But through it all, they chose to trust each other, to lean on the fragile connection they had built. A year later, the community center hosted its first major event, a celebration of new beginnings. Families filled the once empty halls, their laughter echoing through the mansion. Lily stood at the center of it all, her heart swelling with pride as she watched children paint murals and neighbors share stories over cups of tea. Edward appeared at her side, his gaze soft as he looked around the room. "This is your doing," he said quietly. Lily shook her head. "Ours." He smiled, and for the first time, it reached his eyes. "Ours." That night, as the guests departed and the mansion grew quiet once more, Edward surprised Lily with a small box. Inside was a simple but elegant bracelet, its design reminiscent of intertwining vines. "It's not a symbol of ownership," he said, his voice steady. "It's a reminder that even the most tangled roots can grow into something beautiful." Lily slipped the bracelet onto her wrist, tears glistening in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. As they stood together in the soft glow of the chandelier, the past felt like a distant memory, and the future stretched before them like an open road. They had found something neither of them had expected, a second chance. Not just at life, but at love. A year passed, and the mansion, once cloaked in shadows and secrets, had become a vibrant hub of hope and renewal. What had once been a house of isolation now overflowed with life. The laughter of children filled the air as families gathered for a spring festival at the community center. Music played softly in the background, blending with the chatter of neighbors who had come to celebrate the milestones they had achieved together. Lily stood by the entrance of the East Wing, her heart swelling with pride as she watched Emma lead a group of children in a painting activity. Her younger sister had blossomed into a confident young woman, her future now bright with possibilities. Across the room, their father chatted animatedly with a local teacher. His health much improved thanks to the care he'd received. Edward stood beside Lily, a quiet smile on his face. He looked out at the crowd, his once imposing demeanor softened by the joy surrounding them. "You've given this place a purpose," he said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. Lily turned to him, her eyes sparkling. "We've given it a purpose," she corrected. "None of this would have happened without you opening your heart and your doors." Edward chuckled softly, the sound warm and unguarded. "I suppose even an old man like me can learn a thing or two from someone as stubborn as you." The celebration continued into the evening, the mansion illuminated by strings of lights that cast a magical glow over the gardens. As the last of the guests departed, Lily and Edward stood together beneath the archway of blooming roses, the night air cool and crisp around them. Edward reached into his pocket and pulled out a small key, its brass surface catching the moonlight. He handed it to Lily, his expression tender. "What's this?" she asked, curiosity flickering in her eyes. "It's the key to the West Wing," he said. "I think it's time you see everything, no more locked doors, no more secrets." Lily's breath caught as she took the key. Her fingers brushed against his, and in that moment, she saw the full weight of what he was offering. It wasn't just access to the mansion's remaining mysteries. It was trust, a bridge between the past and the future they were building together. They walked side by side to the West Wing, the halls now filled with echoes of laughter instead of silence. Edward opened the door for her, revealing a room that had been untouched for years. Dust motes floated in the air, illuminated by the soft glow of a single chandelier. The walls were lined with paintings, photographs, and mementos from Edward's life, a life he had spent hiding behind walls of fear and regret. "This is where I kept everything that mattered most to me," Edward said, his voice tinged with vulnerability. "I thought locking it away would protect me from the pain of losing it. But I see now that the real pain was never letting anyone in." Lily stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room. Among the relics of Edward's past was a new addition, a framed photograph of the two of them standing in the garden, surrounded by children and families. She turned to Edward, tears brimming in her eyes. "You don't have to hide anymore," she said softly. "You've already built something worth sharing." Edward reached for her hand, his grip steady and warm. "You taught me that, Lily. You gave me a reason to try again." As they stood together in the room that once symbolized isolation, it now felt like a place of new beginnings. The locked doors were gone, replaced by open windows that let in the light of a new chapter. This story is a testament to the power of courage, redemption, and the bonds we create when we let others into our lives. Before we end, I want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced a moment where letting go of the past helped you build a brighter future? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if Lily and Edward's journey touched your heart, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire and uplift. Remember, it's never too late to start over, and even the darkest paths can lead to the brightest destinations. Until next time, take care, stay strong, and always believe in new beginnings. See you in the next story.